Okay.
Looks like it needed more than a password.
And I was definitely lost. We were definitely in trouble if that was the case.
All right.
Okay. All right.
There you go.
Okay. All right. So we're starting a little bit late, but and hopefully everybody can hear. But we had just started talking about the 7 signs of the Apostle John. And last week we had a session where we talked about the first one, which was the wedding in Cana, and some of the significance of that and some unusual things that happened about it. We mentioned about how the significance of the wine, the 120 gallons of wine, is kind of a reference to Hebrew, ancient Jewish prophecy having to do with abundance after the coming of the Messiah. And then we also talked a little bit about how it was almost a secret kind of thing. Of course, everybody knew about the wine when they started drinking it. But until then, all they really had, the only people that knew were the servants, who, when Mary says, do what he says, and Jesus says, do this, and they did that. And then all of a sudden it's wine, and the steward is like, where did this come from? This is great. But it was kind of under the radar, really, for most of the people at the wedding. What John tells us, though, is that in this case, in the case of the first sign, that was really intended to have the disciples believe in Jesus and believe in who he was or is. And this was right after the first calling of the disciples. They were also invited to the wedding. And so they were there for this, and John puts a lot of significance into that. Well, the second sign that comes after that also takes place in Cana. But I was saying a minute ago that there is a lot of things that happen in between the 2 signs. That Jesus first left Cana and went to Capernaum. He did some things there. He went to the temple in Jerusalem and he cleansed it. He kind of threw out the money changers and all that kind of business. He left Judea and made his trip through Samaria, where he met Photini, the woman at the well, and spoke with her and talked about the living water, and talked to somebody outside the Jewish faith about the faith. And that she of course simply became an enormously changed person as a result of that. And then he comes back to Judea, and specifically to the town of Cana. Cana was a fair-sized little town. So let me read this passage from John 4, and that'll tell us what it is exactly that happened there, because this also has some fairly unusual little characteristics. There's quirks to it that would help us understand what John is getting at. So we start John 4, verse 46. He says, so he came again to Cana in Galilee, where he had made the water wine. And at Capernaum there was an official whose son was ill. When he heard that Jesus had come from Judea to Galilee, he went and begged him to come down and heal his son, for he was at the point of death. Jesus therefore said to him, unless you see signs and wonders, you will not believe. The official said to him, sir, come down before my child dies. Jesus said to him, go, your son will live. The man believed the word that Jesus spoke to him and went his way. As he was going down, his servants met him and told him that his son was living. So he asked them the hour when he began to mend, and they said to him, yesterday at the 7th hour, the fever left him, which would have been about 1 o'clock. The father knew that that was the hour when Jesus had said to him, your son will live. And he himself believed, and all his household. This was now the second sign that Jesus did when he had come from Judea to Galilee. So what's interesting about this sign? I mean, all of these miracles are interesting, but there are a couple of interesting things about it that I think are important for us to understand. First of all, it's kind of like the Syro-Phoenician woman. Remember, who shows up and just is making all kinds of noise, begging Jesus to help. In this case, the man comes, and Jesus, there's this line in there where Jesus says, you will not believe unless you see signs and miracles, or something like that. But that was kind of a rebuke, in a sense. That's a verse that's been picked up in some places, and it becomes this warrant for signs and miracles, right? A ministry of signs and miracles and all these things. If we see signs and miracles, it's right. But that's not what Jesus meant. Jesus meant you don't have to see signs and miracles. If you have faith, these things will happen. And so when the man does these things and Jesus rebukes him, it's really not slight. I mean, it's very slight. It wasn't like he really laid into it. But then he says, well, your son is going to be well. Well, this was not known instantaneously, right? In other words, it wasn't like he said, your son is well now. It's going to be all right. Instead, and it takes another day for this man to find out because he had to travel back. And so when he gets back, and the servants are saying, your son, he's recovering. He's doing really well. And then he says, well, when was it that this happened? And of course, the servant said, well, it's like at 1 o'clock yesterday. And then he remembers that is when Jesus said he will live, that he will be healed. And so we have this miracle that is really, I mean, not only substantial from the point of view of what he did for this boy and the illness that he cured, but for the way in which this man experienced it and came to live in the truth. In other words, to understand, this helped him to understand something about Jesus. That he didn't like throw his arms in the air or anything like that, and all of a sudden there's a miracle. He didn't go, you were healed, and there's all of a sudden a miracle. He just said, your son will live. When he gets home, he finds out, in fact, that is actually what happened. So this is another miracle that is different from what we often think of. This is a miracle that was, again, very low key. This was a miracle that was intended to teach something beyond the outcome of the miracle. Certainly Jesus was happy to heal this boy. There's no question about that. But he was also happy to, in a sense, spiritually heal the boy's father, who came to understand who Jesus was and how Jesus does the things that he did. Well, this was actually done, if you will, for a group of people who learned and for the people that were affected by it, and they learned that miracles can happen, but they are not always accompanied by fanfare. They're not always accompanied by a lot of noise and vigor, that instead they just simply happen. We have the faith to have these things happen to us. And so this becomes a sign that teaches us that it is faith that is important, as opposed to not faith in somebody's supposed miracles of healing or whatever they are, Benny Hinn or whoever, fill in whatever name you like, but that instead it is simply important to have faith and to continue praying. And that's what this man found. It's kind of hard to imagine what he was thinking during that 24 hours or so between the time when he left Jesus and the time when he got home. It's unclear that he really had a real notion that his son was going to be healed. He seems to be a little bit surprised when he gets home and they say, well, the fever's gone, or he's improving, he's getting better. And so he learns this faith in kind of a hard way, which is the same way we all learn faith, which is that we simply have faith that God's will be done and that it's for our best. It's intended for our good in whatever fashion this is. And if we pray for other people, then we also pray that God's will, essentially, is what we're asking for, is that his will be done in the life of that person that we're talking about. More particularly beyond that, though, it shows, I think for the first time, among the miracles that we have, it shows that Jesus has the power to actually give life, to restore life, to heal, and to do these things that later on he's just doing all the time. It's just like nonstop. And so we have this miracle, which again is pretty quiet, and which again is not directed necessarily at a huge crowd. It's not necessarily directed at anybody, but except one person in particular, this man who comes and who asks for this favor, this great thing to be done. He's pleased to do that. He's pleased to heal the son of this man. So the second sign that we have tells us that faith has a place in these things. That if we will, in fact, keep faith, then God's will be done. In this case, now that corresponded with the Father's will, that the Son be healed. It's not always the case, but God's will always be done if we simply trust and if we have that faith. So that's the second miracle, the second sign of John. Remember what we said when we first started. For John, these 7 signs and everything he writes. But these 7 signs are here so that you may believe in Jesus Christ and who he is, and to understand who he is, or have some kind of understanding for him. When John writes about all of this stuff, what he's doing, he's hoping, his intention is that people will read it and go, that kind of speaks to me. I'm kind of like a person that doesn't have that much faith, that wants to see this instantaneous healing, this instantaneous resolution, whatever it might happen to be. But it will teach us otherwise. Well, the third sign from John is one that we really talked about just a few weeks ago. It's the paralytic, the man at the side of the pool. And we talked about that. He gets us on Sunday in the middle of the post-gospel area. And it's an astonishing thing. And here, I think, is what, and it's astonishing on many levels, right? But there, in particular, I think there are 1 or 2 things that John takes away from this when he adds this to the list of signs that he talks about. Okay, so you guys remember the story. This man has been living, almost living. I'm sure he's not there all the time, but he spends as much time as he can next to this pool. He comes to Jerusalem, and it's interesting when you read John. John gives the exact dimensions of this pool. John is like Mr. Detail. He puts everything down. He's an excellent historian and an excellent witness to what he sees. And so he describes this pool, how big it is, and how there's all these people laying around these things, and they're all hoping to be healed. So when an angel, apparently there's this whole thing, right? An angel comes down and stirs the water. Whoever gets in first wins, everybody else loses. And so you can only imagine the number of people laying around the side of that pool. And then probably a whole lot of them, tons of them, I guess, but probably has somebody with them. Their mom or their husband or son, I don't know, somebody that would help them to get into the pool if this stirring seemed to happen, if it seemed to come down to that. The paralytic was a man who was not a particularly happy man. He was not a particularly pleasant man when you get down to it. But we don't know what it was like before, how it would be outside of this infirmity that he had. 38 years is a long time to sit around and hope that something is going to happen, that something is going to make your life better. And so it's understandable to us that this man would have lost some hope, that he really, and what we really pick up is that he's kind of a little bit bitter. He's a little bit angry that nobody's there to help him, that nobody seems to care. He's a little upset that he can't do it himself. And so he's just a man that he's pretty much lost hope, Here's something that to think about as far as the context of this. Remember, Jesus is there for the Feast of Pentecost. Now, the Jewish Feast of Pentecost was really a feast that was supposed to mark the giving of the law by Moses, right? So when Moses went up on Mount Sinai and he came back down with the tablets, this is what we're talking about for Jewish Pentecost. And it was one of the times whenever a Jew was supposed to go to Jerusalem for this feast. There were 2 or 3 other things where people were expected to come. And so, it's kind of this commemoration of Moses and the giving of the tablets and the law, and which undergirds all the Jewish society and all their lives. For John, Jesus, among other things, was the new lawgiver, if you will. In other words, we have Moses, and now we have somebody else with the law. Well, what's Jesus' law? Jesus says, "A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another." And so, for John, this is Jesus is Moses redux. He's here. This is Moses, except this is the perfected Moses. Now, he's not saying he's not God, right? But he sees parallels between Moses and between the kind of work that Jesus is doing among the people. So, when Jesus sees this man, and it's Jesus that seeks this guy out, right? And he goes up to him and he engages him in conversation, and he finds a man that's pretty much consumed by self-pity. He finds a man that's pretty much consumed by bitterness against others for not helping him, for not assisting him, for not in some way trying to make his life better. A man that, and in fact, as we know, when we think about it, if we think about our own lives, if he was bitter like this, that may be why people would not come and help him anymore. I mean, those kinds of things have a way of becoming circles. And so Jesus finds this man, he finds him, the man doesn't find him, finds this man, says, do you want to be cured? What does the man say? He says, no one ever helps me. You know, so he doesn't say yes, he doesn't say no, he just says, nobody helps me. I can't, this is awful, it's terrible. I've been doing this for years. These people, they're no good at all, basically. So he carries on like that.
Curmudgeon.
He is, yeah. I spend a lot of time like that. But Jesus, being Jesus, when he hears the man talking this way, it's almost like Jesus kind of looks through it, right? He looks through it, he just kind of ignores the noise. But instead, when Jesus looks at this man, what he sees is somebody that has the image of God within it, which, as we know, everybody does. For Jesus, this is the determining factor. This is why he's going to help. And he's why that he, and so when Jesus makes it, he knew it all along, I guess, but after listening to the man complain about it and nobody else was going to help him about it, Jesus doesn't say you're healed. He doesn't say anything except get up, stand up. And then he says, take your mat, go home. And the guy's like, yeah, it's hard to imagine the confusion the guy must have been feeling, right? Here's somebody telling him to stand up, and he can't stand up. I mean, what kind of fool is this? But what's the harm in trying? So he stands up, and he's up. And then he reaches for the mat, he gets the mat, and he's still up. I mean, the confusion in this man's mind must have been incredible. The trying to come to grips with what had just happened to him. And he kind of wanders away. You know, later on, he has, because it was the Sabbath, right? And Jesus, you can only conclude that Jesus waited for the Sabbath to do a lot of these things. And I think he had a purpose for that too. Because the Sabbath was not supposed to be a day when no good was done, when nothing at all was done. The Sabbath was the day, it was the day of rest. It was the day, and this can cover a lot of things. And so of course he waited on the Sabbath to do this. And then he sends the man away. And this man, you know, he's been whining, and now he can't whine. He's got nothing to whine about. Except he's got to walk home. He's required to take action on his own. And so for the first time in his life, this man who was demanding that other people do things for him, now is in a position of doing things for himself. And so it's kind of astonishing to think about what those first minutes or days must have been like for this man. He not only had to unlearn, you know, this notion that he could not move and could not do things, but in a lot of ways, I think he probably had to come to grips with a lot of this stuff where he's mad at people for not doing stuff for him. Because now, maybe he should do stuff for other people. Maybe now he's faced with that thing that he didn't really want to be faced before. So this man and what he did and what Jesus did for him, this is really astonishing. I mean, aside from the fact that, you know, the paralytic is given the ability to walk and is made well, I mean, that's astonishing enough. But it's astonishing in the way in which, number one, Jesus seeks out this man. And think about there are tons of other miracles in the New Testament, you know, blind guys or lepers, you know, standing up on the hill, you know, yelling at him to come and do this, come and do that. Or you know, people come and they seek him out to go, to go home and help their children who are dying. And all these things where people are asking for help. And so this is, in this case, I mean, the guy would have, surely, he would have liked help, but he didn't even ask for it. His hope was too far gone. He simply had no belief that anything good was going to happen to him. In that sense, it's a little bit like the woman with the issue of blood, except she had faith. You know, she could not ask him. She did not feel like she could ask Jesus. She kind of went on this covert thing since she wasn't supposed to be around anybody because she was unclean. So she just worked her way through the crowd, just hoping she could touch his garment, not talk to him, not ask him anything, just touch his garment, which is kind of the height of desperation. If you will, the lady with the issue of blood is kind of the flip side of this paralytic, right? She would do anything to find that healing. And so she went out and she sought it out. He was just as desperate for healing, but he had no hope. He'd given up. He was just going to complain about it for the rest of his life. And Jesus found him, and all of a sudden, stop your complaint. You can't complain anymore. This has worked for you. And Jesus has been here, and now not only can you walk, but you have to think about what this means for you personally. And so for John, when he looks at this, he sees this as a kind of particular class of miracle, and it really is. It's really a fabulous thing. And John is so good about communicating these things. You know, where John talks about he's whining and carrying on and complaining about other people and yada yada yada. And I can almost see John kind of going, yeah, and really just bringing it all in, which is one of the great things. I mean, aside from John being such a theological giant, is that the detail in John's gospel is simply astonishing. Now, Luke also is good. As a doctor, Luke looked for some things that we see in Luke that other people might have missed. But John, as far as a person that can actually paint a picture of what's going on, is probably the best of the lot when you come right down to it. So at this point, we're down through 3 miracles, and my intention is to do. Last week was kind of a beginning thing. Do 2 miracles next week, and do the last 2 the week after that, and then kind of see where we are. This is a short study, but I think that if we never understand exactly how miracles are done, but kind of what caused Jesus to do these things in all these particular circumstances, that we can often find ourselves in that some circumstance in our own life, as far as that goes. So anyway, anybody have any thoughts or questions?
Well, I have a thought. It was interesting. I never really saw it this way till today, but I see that the paralytic was crippled in 2 ways. He was crippled physically, but he was also crippled mentally.
Yeah.
Because he knew what everybody else should be doing, but he didn't know what he should be doing. But Jesus addressed both of those, the physical and the mental paralysis.
Yeah.
Jesus brought his attention to the paralytic and told him what he should do.
Yeah.
Instead of what everybody else should do. I think there's such a lesson in that, because I think human nature, as I understand it, is that and this really has a lot to do with survival, but people's attention is out here, and very, very little attention is here.
Mm-hmm.
And what Jesus did was great to have the paralytic turn the lens.
Mm-hmm.
So I just think about how universal that is. With being paralytic, it wasn't just one person.
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, nowadays, it's probably always been true. I mean, everybody's got complaints, and mostly their complaints are about other people. That doctor wouldn't do this for me, or I couldn't get anybody to take me to the store. I don't know, whatever. And it's one thing after another. We all have that kind of strand within us where it's not really our fault, really. It's so-and-so would do something.
Well, I was talking to someone today about when you call an office just to make an appointment, the first thing you hear is, if this is an emergency, call 911.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if you've ever called 911 in an emergency, the chances of you actually getting the assistance you need is pretty remote.
Mm-hmm.
So it's sort of like passing the buck before you even let your request be known.
Yeah.
And so, I think that before after hours, I understand that those messages are more appropriate, but I'm talking about hearing them during business hours. It's sort of like, I want you, but I don't.
Right. Yeah, because in a certain way, I think people reach a point where they find a certain amount of satisfaction in being able to blame stuff on other people. Because then it's not. That was probably really hard for the paralytic to give up on that. That's just such a knee-jerk reaction.
And the other thing is there may have been some people who tried to help him, but he may not have recognized it as help.
Yeah, or it wasn't the kind of help he wanted, or at the right time.
It's just hard for me to believe somebody could be that long ago and say, would you like some water, or can I help you do some bread, or would you like to get the shade, or
something like that.
Yeah.
The other thing that strikes me about about the paralytic, about him, is that, as an adult child of an alcoholic, it's like, if I could just figure out how to do it right, I'll be okay. And I never could figure out how to do it right enough where I was okay enough. Didn't matter what the result of my actions and words were. And so, in other words, you grew up, knowing that you're totally undeserving of whatever and everything. Okay. Well, this guy really embodied being undeserving on many levels. And here God says, I see Christ, I see God in you, and you are deserving. It's like what an outpouring of grace that shatters all of that. If I can get it right, if I do it right, if I can just be a certain way, then I can have God's mercy. Then I can experience the healing or whatever it is that I'm seeking. And but I also imagined him, it's like, because I think that the healing was emotional and psychological as well as physical. I mean, I sort of think of him as being sort of like, once he got it was like, so what I can do? He's like, oh, look at this, and I love it, and this is possible.
I don't know if this is true, but some of the movies that show the paralytic after he was healed was the rabbis were really giving him a hard time about being healed on Sunday.
Yeah.
And then they wanted to know who had healed him.
Yeah.
Like that person was bad.
Yeah.
And so the paralytic in the movies, I don't know if this is scriptural or not, but he pointed out to Jesus in a really accusatory way, like, that's the man who healed me. He's the one that's bad, not me.
Yeah, you could kind of see that, We get the same kind of reaction with the blind man.
That's the way the text reads. I mean, because at first it was like when they asked him, well, why are you carrying your mat on the Sabbath?
Yeah.
He said, well, the guy that healed me told me to pick it up and walk. And they said, well, who was it? So I don't know. I mean, Jesus, he had never seen Jesus before. He didn't know who Jesus was. A stranger walks up, take up your mat and walk. And then later he finds out it's Jesus and he rats him out. He runs into it was. I mean, I don't know that he was still emotional.
Yeah.
I'm not, because you don't have any sense of gratitude. You don't have any sense of a loyalty, or it's like just making sure the blame gets where it goes. And it's,
There were two bad men here for working on the Sabbath, Jesus and the paralytic, because they both were doing stuff they shouldn't be doing.
But this chapter to me really brings up what is faith. Because Jesus, in a way I was hearing, I'm asking if this is a question, is I'm kind of understanding that Jesus was saying you shouldn't need miracles to believe in me.
Yeah.
So in a way, he suggested that we can believe in him without, if you will, putting our fingers in his gloves.
Yeah.
Like the doubt in Peter. Yeah. But however, if people did not know who Jesus was, they'd never seen him or heard him. How could they really have faith and believe in him?
Yeah. Well, in a sense, it's I think it was the week after the paralytic, we do the blind man. And the same thing happened to him. Once he got his eyes, or he got his sight, and then they're all over him. What are you doing? What are you walking? You're doing this. You're doing that. Who did this? That was work. And the blind man's like, what's it to you? I mean,
All but done on the Sabbath.
Oh, yeah.
yeah. So
There's pension for that.
he did, remember the woman that had been bent over, she couldn't stand up straight, that was a Sabbath. And I think, and the commentary on this seven signs, suggests that Jesus just went out of his way to make sure he did this stuff on the Sabbath, because that was something that he needed people to understand.
So that's the magic bullet, okay? If you want healing, ask for it on the Sabbath. That must be it.
Well, or just ask for whenever it's ready.
Yeah.
But if you're the kind of person that says it can never happen on the Sabbath, then you're probably a Pharisee.
But I thought when you read the passage about the man who, when Jesus said, you guys want signs and wonders, but didn't the passage say that that he had faith that Jesus, and just Jesus said? I'm sure it was he said he would be okay. I hope he meant that. Sort of a struggle of faith, but he accepted that word and turned around. He didn't continue, based upon the scripture, he didn't continue to badger Jesus for a sign or wonder, or he accepted and in faith turned around and went home. His servant met him. And then that faith was justified and validated and confirmed when he found out that his son started to, the fever left him, at 1 o'clock, which is when Jesus said that.
And although you kind of think, it says the servants, he asked, when did he start getting better? And they told him, and then it says, the way it's phrased is, and then he remembered that was when Jesus had did this. I would kind of guess, without knowing, that he probably spent the prior 24 hours both hoping and afraid.
I believe, help my unbelief.
Help my unbelief, exactly.
Yeah, that's right. But the last thing I want to say about the paralytic is this. We talked about how John, on some level, sees Jesus as the new lawgiver, right? The new commandment, and I think for John, this becomes this new commandment that you love one another is really important from the point of view of Jesus. And he gives us that commandment, but he illustrates that commandment in everything that he does. He loves the people that are cranky and out of sorts. He really loves the Pharisees, actually, when you get right down to it. But he doesn't really he loves the Samaritan woman at the well. He's not supposed to be talking to. And Jesus was pretty, he was just looking at people and understanding them and seeing, no matter who they were, seeing that there was a connection. He knew that there was.
There is some, that particular sign set up a significant teaching that follows that flows right from that, the fact that he did it on the Sabbath, and then, he says, my Father's working and I myself am working, and then they were really in a kerfuffle because John's commentary is that they understood him to say that he was equal with God, and he was God's son in a unique way, in a uniquely connected way, which set off. And, and so I've always, for a long time, whether this is true or not, but it struck me at some point that the pool of Bethesda was a judgment, and it kind of illustrates a little bit what you're saying in terms of Jesus' new commandment. Because, so an angel, it wasn't on a schedule. They just had to be there, and the angel would stir the water. But then what had to happen? I had to beat everybody else in. The first one in the pool, that's the only one. So everybody's there, their goal is to beat everybody. That's not exactly loving your neighbor as yourself. You wonder if they'd all said, the water moved, let's all hold hands and all put our foot in the water at the same time. We'll help the paralytic. You just wonder if, if that had been the mindset, if all of a sudden everybody, because Jesus came in anonymously, And out of that whole group, only that man was healed at that time. You know, and so there was something.
And he didn't get in the water.
And he didn't, no, it didn't have anything to do with the water. It had to do, but anyway, and then it set up that teaching about, I only do the things I see my Father do.
Yeah.
You know, why did he only heal one man? So, you know, he wasn't driven by people's needs.
Yeah.
It was the will of God. So that's the one that my Father wanted me to heal. And so that, you know, that's who I healed. And it's like, it's a lot of mystery kind of around that whole dynamic.
Yeah.
I was just thinking about the hierarchy that could create where if your vision is better, if you're faster than your neighbor, you get divine healing.
Yeah.
It has nothing to do with being a child of
There's
God.
something wrong. It just feels like a judgment where people are trapped there.
And
They're trapped there.
And I saw this in John, I can't find it now, I have to look, but the Pharisees were asking how could he speak with authority because he wasn't properly schooled.
Yeah.
And that he had not studied with the rabbis.
Yeah.
And I thought that was, I think that we fall subject to that too.
Yeah.
Is we look for signs of like, we're looking for credentials, is all we're looking for.
Yeah.
All this letter.
And credentials
Yeah.
is not the same thing as ability.
Right. Right. No matter what you're talking about.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
But also, I think that, you know, and, you know, this probably shows my spiritual poverty when I say this, but, you know, when the new commandment is to love one another, right? But I don't think it's possible for us to do that without the Holy Spirit. You know, and when you're talking about the way that Christ could look at, you know, this curmudgeon and see the image of God in him and have compassion. And I think that, I don't know if it's culturally with us or it's, you know, just how human nature is, but, you know, we very seldom have compassion for ourselves or anyone else. And how can you love someone? I don't think it's possible without God.
Well, one of the things that I see a lot, and that is people trying to love somebody else and they don't love themselves. And if you don't have it to give, you're not going to be able to give it. And ultimately, you're not going to treat people better than you do yourself.
Yeah.
And I've seen it a zillion times. And so, you know, a lot of Christians will say, well, I'm not supposed to love myself. I'm supposed to love other people. Well, if you're a child of God, you are lovable, and there's nothing wrong with knowing God loves you, other people love you, and that you're lovable and you can love you. But I really think having a loving relationship with the image of God in you, it may be foundational in terms of your ability to love other people as Christ did. But I think that one of the things I think is missing in the equation for a lot of people is that they judge their Christian walk by what they do for other people, and they completely ignore what they do for themselves. It's really a horror. And I see so many people turned away from the church because they did that until it collapses and no longer works.
I think there's a happy medium. You know, a lot of times, especially if you look at the Desert Fathers or the monastic writers, they'll say that you know, this piece of advice they're given is always consider others as better than yourself. But that I think goes to a question of judging. That if we're not supposed to judge, then we're not going to we ought not set ourselves up as being better than others.
Well, Father Seraphim at the Holy Cross says that he teaches his monks to consider themselves the most sinful person in the monastery, because he says that if they can grasp that idea and practice it, then their eyes are on themselves and not on other people.
Right.
And so what it's like, it's the real leveler when it really comes to the ego and pride.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
No, I was just to say that we want to keep in mind that love your neighbor as yourself is the second commandment.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's the second commandment.
Yeah.
You know, that you'll never get the second one right if you don't get the first one right.
Yeah.
I mean, and,
Yeah.
I don't claim that I know how that all works together, but it just seems like that somehow loving God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength sort some things out in the process about how we think about ourselves and how we think about other people, and in terms of loving ourselves and loving others. But it's a byproduct of the first commandment. It strikes me as kind of like a byproduct of the first commandment,
Yeah,
so,
it comes out of that first commandment.
yeah, it's a natural outcome, because what's on God's heart becomes what's on our heart, and what's Paul has an interesting thing in Philippians 2. He talks about sending Timothy to the Philippian church, and he says, "I have no one else of a kindred spirit who will genuinely be concerned for your welfare. For they all seek after their own interests and not those of Christ Jesus." So, it's like Timothy, Paul's heart was for the churches and Timothy's heart was for the churches.
So that was a problem from the very beginning.
Yeah, well, I think that you have to really operationalize what love is and self-love. To me, an example of self-love is caring about yourself to make good decisions. Caring enough about yourself to be responsible, respectful, and fun to be around. I mean, I think most people think of self-love as narcissism, and I think that's an extension of pride. And that's not love.
No.
Okay, well, all right, I guess that's it. We'll get ready for vespers now. I remember to turn that thing off.
Just remember the icons. Oh, wait a minute, we don't
Which
know.
icon?
Yeah, really.